Look, a very serious story affecting the UK at the moment. 4 teenage boys have been arrested on suspicion of murdering a 12-year-old girl in Liverpool city centre. This comes as London's on track for the worst year of fatal teenage stabbings on record.
Yeah, the fatal stabbing of a 16-year-old in West London on Wednesday has brought the number of teenage murders this year to 28. That's one off the record of 29 teens in 2008. More than a month to go until the end of the year, there are concerns that this grim figure could go even higher.
Well, our London reporter is with us in the studio. And Alice, look, first of all, before we talk about the shocking murder in Hounslow on Wednesday, we have to talk about this 12-year-old girl suffering significant injuries in Liverpool on Thursday night. Any other day, this would be the lead on all of the front pages of the newspapers this morning, of course, overshadowed by Omicron breaking all of the headlines for us. But there seems to be a knife crime crisis in our youth of the UK at the moment.
Yeah, it's a really significant issue, and it's something that is affecting people across the whole of the UK. And I will say it does proportionately affect people in London more than anywhere else in the UK. But I think what we saw in Liverpool this week has been just so shocking. I mean, the latest on that is 4 teenagers have been arrested overnight on suspicion of murder over the murder of a 12-year-old girl in Liverpool city centre on Thursday night when the Christmas lights were switched on. And I think the victim being a girl and 12 years old is actually very unusual, because sadly most people who are the victims of stabbing are teenage men. So.
OK, and Alice, this came just 24 hours after a murder here in West London, allegedly over a handbag.
Yeah, the facts about it are quite sketchy at the moment. What we do know is that police were called to Raleigh Road in Hounslow, which is where I've just come from. They were there at about 9 p.m. on Wednesday evening because they had reports that a stabbing had taken place following a fight. They arrived at the scene and sadly a 16-year-old man sadly died at the scene. Now, he's been named locally as Ashmeet Singh, although it is important to say that has not been confirmed yet by police. We understand he attended Uxbridge College. I've been in touch with them and they gave me this statement. They say, all of us at Uxbridge College are profoundly saddened to learn of this tragic loss in such worrying circumstances of this young man taking his first steps into adulthood. And I think that phrase there, first steps into adulthood, is so poignant. He was only 16 years old, still a child. And if we sort of add that to this 12-year-old girl dying, I mean, a lot of criminologists are concerned about the fact that the victims of knife crime in the UK are getting younger and younger. And as you were saying earlier, we're now on track for the highest number of youth homicides for over 13 years. It's really concerning. In regards to this particular case, no arrests have yet been made, unlike the case in Liverpool. And police are urging anyone to come forward with information.
Incredibly important and worrying. What's the Mayor of London saying about all of this?
Well, I think the Metropolitan Police and the Mayor for London know that this is a really big problem. In fact, they've just finished a week-long operation called Operation Sceptre, and that was a real sort of crackdown on knife crime. And so in 1 week, they took away 290 knives and arrested over 1,000 people in the capital. And I think that gives a sense of the scale of the problem there. And it's interesting because certain crime has gone down, gun crime's gone down, homicides have gone down, not teenage homicides. That's a very different story, and sadly it is a story about knife crime, and it's a story of families being broken apart by a tragic loss of a young person. So Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, was asked about this latest stabbing just a couple of days ago, and this is what he had to say.
It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking when you have another bereaved family that I've got a right to, and me knowing what they're going through. Their lives are never going to be the same again. And so it's no consolation to a bereaved mum or a bereaved dad. The youth violence is going down. They don't really care if knife crime's going down or gun crime's going down because they've lost their loved one. And that's what makes us even more determined to continue the progress. And what we've seen, though, is although fewer young people are being stabbed, the ferociousness of those that are lead to these dire consequences. And that's why it's so important we all support the police where we can.
Stabbings Khan speaking there. Now, Alice, if London is almost at the same record number that we had in 2008 in terms of killings from knife crime, it begs the question, what has actually improved, if anything, in the last 13 years?
I think that's what's so concerning, is looking at the data now and looking at the data 13 years ago and seeing no change whatsoever, and how frustrating that is, because there are some amazing initiatives, schemes, charities that are working so hard across the capital. I've been speaking to a number of them this week, desperate to bring down knife crime, but sadly the data is showing that that's actually not happening. it is something to stress that knife crime is something that disproportionately is concentrated in London. If we look across England and Wales, a third of knife crime incidents do happen in London. And one of the main factors behind that is gang-related activity. We understand from the Met there are about 200 gangs that they are currently watching that are in operation at the moment in the capital. However, that is not the story behind every stabbing, and we must be really clear on that. That is not always the full story. I was actually speaking yesterday to Barry Mizzen. Now, his son, Jimmy, was sadly randomly stabbed back in 2008, back when stabbings were as high as they were now. And I kind of asked him, what is your reaction to these very grim statistics 13 years on? Has anything changed? And this is what he had to say.
I fully understand that people won't come forward with information for fear of what might be going on in individual communities. But information can be put forward anonymously through Crime Stoppers. So I'd encourage people, if you've got information, you've got evidence that can be used to get perpetrators identified and convicted. That is very much for the medium term. And so I think longer term, what is going on? What are the actual drivers of this? It's too easy to just say it's lack of funding, it's deprivation. What are the real drivers of this? Let's have a bit more in-depth knowledge there. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here 1 year after the other. I mean, a horrific thought, Alice. There's at least 20 young people walking the streets of London right now who will not be with us this time next year. I think it's a very sobering thought.
That was Barry Mizzen speaking to me there. And I think he raised two very sort of sobering points, really. I think one was this issue of the reluctance of people to come forward. And I think there's sort of two issues with that. I think the Met themselves would say there's a long way to go towards building trust, particularly with certain communities. But I was actually speaking to a sort of source of mine at the Met the other day, and she was saying how difficult it is for people to come forward, even when they are victims. They don't want to engage with the police because they're so worried about the repercussions, particularly if it's gang-related activity. And that's what's so concerning. But also the point that he makes there is that this year isn't over, and we cannot expect more people to die for the rest of the year, which for someone like him, who's been campaigning on this for the last 13 years, it's really disconcerting.